Alrighty, so today we are going to be making a face mask that looks like this with the lining on the inside. So if you want to cut more efficiently, you can layer it, filter the outer fabric with the pattern facing in, filter, and then the back pattern. And this should be a lighter color. Again, you can have the pattern facing in, but I just have both white sheets. So then you're going to line those up. And if you're using large sheets of fabric, you can layer these on top of each other and cut lots at once if you've got a rotary cutting mat. Otherwise, you can trace around it and just cut it out regularly. Okay, so I'm going to be using this shape. There's several different designs that are similar to this. You can find this online at the Denver Mask Task Force. So I've got a rotary cutter. It's really good for efficient cutting. You can also trace around this and cut it out with regular scissors. Alrighty, so it's gonna look like that. And then we are gonna take off the top 2 layers of our inner fabric, and you'll understand why in just a minute. And now we're gonna go sew.
There's quite a mess in here.
It is a mess. I'm sorry, it's such a mess. This is a pop-up operation. Alrighty, so the first thing we're gonna do is sew along the outside seam of both of these pieces. It doesn't really matter if the edge is super secure. And I'm giving about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here. You can go a little bit narrower, but you want to make sure that you don't lose any of your layers. Okay, so there's one side. The other side, sometimes the tension on my machine gives me a little bit of trouble here because it's not as thick of a piece of fabric. And so that's just gonna crumple. I try to mitigate that by just holding the end. You can also adjust the tension, but I'm trying to do this as fast as possible, so I try not to bother with that too much. There you go. So you see it got a little bit wrinkly. I'm just gonna pull that flat. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're going for volume here. Okay, so now I'm gonna turn this inside fabric inside out so that I've got that nice clean seam. Now you could iron this, but I'm not gonna bother since we're trying to go quickly. And with this side, you're gonna open it up to the middle like a book, and you'll notice that both of our outer layers are together like that. So now we're gonna lay, lining up the top mask, both of those clean seams together, taking care to line up the corners as best as you can. So I should have that side that's even and this side that's even. And then I'll start with the top, and I'm gonna pinch those 2 seams together to make sure that they don't move, and then kind of fold this flat so that I can start sewing here and I won't have the nose be displaced, if that makes sense. So I'm sewing along the top line. Again, about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and make sure that you're not losing any of your layers. When that happens, when you turn it inside out, you'll have a piece of fabric that sticks out. And I usually stop with the needle down at the nose point and turn it by lifting up my presser foot. It just makes the nose point a little bit sharper. And so then again, I'm gonna make sure that all my layers are pulled together nice and neat. And sew all the way off the end. Great, now I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom. So again, I'm gonna first pinch in the middle to make sure that those seams are together, and then pull all the fabric flat to the outside. Alrighty. So now you have 2 options. If you're doing this with elastic, it's gonna look a little different than if you're doing it with binding tape or with just cord. So I'll show you one, this time with elastic, but then I can show you again with cords to show you how it's different. So I'm gonna take 1 piece of elastic for each side. These are 7.5 inches. I find that the 7-inch tends to be a little bit too tight, and I'd rather have it too loose than too tight because it can always be bound in the back with a paper clip. So now I'm gonna find my layers of fabric, and here it might be confusing where to stick the elastic, but I wanna stick it between the two layers that are gonna be facing out, so that when this is turned inside out, that elastic is gonna be nestled nicely between those two layers. So first I'm gonna kind of flip the elastic the direction that I want it. So remember, this is how it's gonna go around an ear. It might also look like that, but you don't want it to be twisted because that's not gonna fit as nicely over the ear. So it's gonna go like that. And now I'm gonna stick this loop of elastic in between my two outer layers of fabric. And now I'm gonna line up one with each side. And you could use pins here, but for efficiency's sake, I tend to just kind of leave this other one hanging and adjust it as I sew. So now I'm gonna sew to get that elastic secure in place. Don't worry about back stitching here because you're gonna sew it again on the outside. Again, make sure as you sew that you've got all your layers where they should be. And then about halfway, I'm just gonna adjust my elastic here, make sure that it hasn't twisted. And again, I'm gonna line it up so that it's right flush with the edge of where I'm sewing. Okay. And again on the other side. To flip the elastic. Oh, that one's just got a little piece that's frayed. We cut an inch wide piece of elastic to make 1/4 inches. So again, stick it in there. And here, if you're using straps, the only thing that's different is that you're gonna have two separate pieces of fabric, and so you're gonna just stuff them inside and have the raw edges pointing out. So whatever edge you want to be wrapped around the head is gonna be inside in two different pieces. Now this is a little different than the other side because we're gonna have to leave a hole in the middle so that we can turn this inside out. So what I'm gonna do, you can see there's my piece of elastic. I'm just going to secure the elastic and then I'm gonna turn it around. So I'm gonna go to about there, drop the needle in so it's easy to turn, and sew right back to the edge. If your machine has a back function, you can also use that. Mine's just really old. And again, we're gonna sew this piece of elastic in place on this end. And turn it around. All right, so now, if I reach inside this pocket, I can pull out this strap, and I can also reach all the way through to grab the strap on the other side, and that's what I'm gonna pull on to turn this inside out. So I like this method of sticking the elastic in the corners better than other kinds because it gives you a really nice, clean corner without having to sew a pocket there to thread anything through. So on this side, we've got an open edge. So now on this open edge, all we're gonna do is we're gonna tuck this carefully in with our fingers. Again, you can use pins here if you need them, but it's also easy enough to do with your fingers. We're gonna tuck that side down and this side down and pinch them together. And we're gonna run this edge under the machine. Make sure you get your elastic under first. So now what we can do is we're actually gonna sew all the way around the mask once. So first we're gonna close off this seam. And now as I'm sewing all the way around, I'm gonna try to make sure that this seam is kind of as flat as I can get it. You could iron it, but I'm not gonna bother for time's sake. But you can kind of pull both sides down so that it makes that edge nice and sharp. And here I'm gonna sew as close to the edge as I'm comfortable. It's about 1/8 of an inch or less. So I'm gonna stop again at the corner to turn it, make a nice sharp seam, pull that seam down, pull the fabric down. If you're worried about the elastic pulling out, you can always go over these corners twice. So again, making sure that I'm pulling the fabric down. And then I'm going to sew all the way around to where I started and go just a little bit further. Trim off all of the threads. And there we go. As you can see, that front seam, if you pull the edges apart, it's going to be nice and clean. Same thing on the back. You've got a nice clean nose seam. And this is going to fit right around the head. If these are too loose, I've seen pictures of folks either tying them together in the back or using a paper clip. That's going to fit like that. Bobby pins, or you can shorten the amount of elastic depending on the size. There you go. I hope that was helpful.